You keep calling it loneliness when it is actually untrained dependence on other people for your peace. If your mind cannot stay steady without company, then your mind is not governed by reason yet. It is governed by presence and reaction. Today you are going to see how much of your discomfort comes from mistaken judgment, not from being alone, but from not knowing how to stand inside your own thinking without running from it. Stay with this fully. Let it challenge you in a direct and honest way. And if you want more teachings like this, subscribe and stay in this space where we practice thinking clearly, living with discipline, and building a mind that does not collapse when others are not there. What follows is not comfort. It is correction. Number 1. Examine why you fear being alone with yourself. Sit with this question before you do anything else. Why are you so eager to escape your own company? Do not answer too quickly. Do not say it is because you are lonely. Do not say it is because human beings are social creatures. Do not hide behind explanations that sound wise but require no examination. Look carefully. There is a deeper reason. When the room becomes quiet and no one is there to entertain you or reassure you or distract you from yourself, what happens? Thoughts begin to rise, regrets appear, old mistakes return. Unfinished responsibilities step forward, desires demand attention, fears that were hidden beneath noise suddenly become visible, and so many people spend their lives running. They run into conversations, they run into relationships, they run into endless entertainment, they run into constant activity, they run into crowds, not because they love people, because they fear themselves. This is where the examination must begin. You say you want happiness, yet how can you be happy if you cannot endure a single hour alone with your own thoughts? How can you claim to govern your life if silence immediately becomes unbearable? How can you call yourself free if your peace depends upon the presence of another person? The person who cannot be content alone has placed their well-being into hands they do not control. And whatever depends on what you do not control will always remain unstable. This is the first truth you must face. Your suffering does not come from solitude itself. Your suffering comes from your judgment of solitude. There are people surrounded by others who are miserable. There are people sitting alone who possess complete tranquility. The difference is not the circumstance. The difference is the judgment. One person says being alone is deprivation. Another person says being alone is an opportunity for self-command. The circumstance remains identical. The mind creates the experience. This is why the examination of judgment stands at the center of the disciplined life. You are not disturbed by being alone. You are disturbed by what you tell yourself about being alone. Pay attention to the language inside your mind. Listen carefully when silence arrives. Do you immediately begin telling yourself that something is missing? Do you tell yourself that life would be better if someone were beside you? Do you tell yourself that your value depends upon being desired by others? Do you tell yourself that your worth increases when someone chooses you? These judgments are not harmless. These judgments become chains. The mind accepts them as truth and begins organizing life around them. Then every rejection becomes a wound. Every absence becomes a crisis. Every period of solitude becomes a punishment, not because reality demands it, because judgment created it. The disciplined person learns to challenge these judgments, not tomorrow, not when circumstances improve. Now, the moment a thought appears, ask a simple question. Is this within my control? If the answer is no, then why have you given it authority over your peace? Whether another person calls you, whether another person stays, whether another person admires you, whether another person understands you, these things belong to another will. They do not belong to yours. You may prefer them, you may appreciate them, but you cannot possess them. The attempt to possess what does not belong to you creates endless anxiety. This is why so many people become desperate in relationships. They are not seeking companionship. They are seeking control. They want certainty where certainty cannot exist. They want guarantees from human beings who themselves are changing every day. They demand permanence from what is naturally temporary. Then they wonder why peace never arrives. Peace never arrives because peace cannot be built upon what is unstable. Look honestly at your own life. How much energy have you spent trying to secure affection? How much time have you spent wondering what others think about you? How many decisions were made because you feared being alone? How many opportunities were ignored because you wanted approval? How many principles were abandoned because you wanted acceptance? These questions matter because every answer reveals where your freedom has been surrendered. The person who fears solitude often believes they are seeking connection. Many times they are seeking escape. Escape from responsibility. Escape from self-examination. Escape from the work of governing their own mind. When no one else is present, there is nowhere to hide. You must face yourself directly. You must confront your habits. You must examine your desires. You must acknowledge your weaknesses. You must recognize your excuses. This is difficult, but difficulty does not make something bad. Difficulty often reveals what is necessary. Consider physical training. The body grows stronger through resistance. The mind follows the same principle. The person who constantly avoids solitude weakens their capacity for self-governance. The person who willingly enters solitude develops strength, not because solitude itself possesses magic, because solitude removes distractions. It exposes reality. It reveals the condition of your character. If you wish to know yourself, stop filling every empty moment. Stop reaching for noise the instant silence appears. Stop seeking stimulation whenever discomfort arises. Remain present. Observe. Watch what emerges. At first, you may discover restlessness. You sit quietly for 10 minutes and immediately feel the urge to check your phone. You feel the urge to contact someone. You feel the urge to consume information. Why? Because stillness reveals dependency. The undisciplined mind cannot tolerate itself. It demands constant occupation. It seeks relief rather than understanding. But if you remain seated and continue observing, something remarkable happens. You begin separating yourself from your impulses. You realize that every urge does not deserve obedience. You realize every thought does not deserve belief. You realize every feeling does not deserve action. This recognition marks the beginning of freedom. Most people live as servants to their immediate reactions. They feel something and instantly obey. They desire something and immediately pursue. They fear something and instantly avoid. They never pause. They never examine. They never choose. The rational mind must reclaim authority, and solitude provides the training ground. When you are alone, practice observation. Notice the thought. Notice the feeling. Notice the impulse. Then ask yourself whether it deserves your agreement. A thought appears saying you are incomplete without companionship. Examine it. Is virtue absent because you are alone? Is reason absent because you are alone? Is integrity absent because you are alone? Is courage absent because you are alone? If the highest goods remain available, then what exactly have you lost? You have lost a preference, not a necessity. This distinction changes everything. Many people confuse preferences with necessities. They prefer companionship and then convince themselves they need companionship. They prefer praise and then convince themselves they need praise. They prefer comfort and then convince themselves they need comfort. Soon they become dependent upon things that were never required for a good life. A good life depends upon character, nothing else. Circumstances can support character or challenge character, but they cannot replace character. This means happiness must be sought where happiness can actually be secured, not in another person's presence, not in another person's approval, not in another person's affection, within your own judgments and choices, within your own conduct, within your own use of reason. This realization brings tremendous responsibility. It removes excuses. You can no longer blame loneliness for your unhappiness. You can no longer blame circumstances for your restlessness. You can no longer blame absence for your dissatisfaction. The work returns to where it always belonged, to you. This may feel severe. Good. Reality is often severe, but reality is also liberating, because once happiness depends upon your character rather than external conditions, you regain power. Not power over events, not power over people, power over yourself. And self-command is the only power that cannot be taken without your consent. Begin practicing this immediately. Set aside time every day to be alone, not as punishment, as training. 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour if possible. Sit without distractions. Allow thoughts to appear. Observe them carefully. Ask what they reveal. Ask what judgments support them. Ask whether those judgments are true. Do not rush the process. The purpose is not comfort. The purpose is clarity. Many uncomfortable truths may emerge. Perhaps you discover that your need for companionship comes from insecurity. Perhaps you discover that you seek attention because you doubt your own worth. Perhaps you discover that you depend on others because you have neglected your own character. Good. Now the real work can begin. You cannot correct what you refuse to see. Self-deception is the enemy of growth. The examined life requires courage. Not courage on a battlefield. Courage in private. Courage to look directly at yourself. Courage to admit weakness without making excuses. Courage to acknowledge faults without despair. Courage to begin correcting them immediately. Every evening, conduct a review. Ask yourself, what disturbed your peace today? Ask yourself, what judgments created that disturbance? Ask yourself whether those judgments were rational. Ask yourself where you surrendered control over your own mind. Do not condemn yourself. Do not praise yourself. Observe honestly. A judge who cannot see clearly cannot govern wisely. The same applies to the mind. Clarity must come before improvement. You may discover that much of your loneliness comes from expectation. You expected someone to understand you. You expected someone to remain. You expected someone to provide happiness. Then reality failed to obey your expectations. The disappointment followed. Notice what happened. The suffering did not come from reality. The suffering came from demanding that reality become something else. This habit destroys tranquility. The disciplined person learns to work with reality rather than argue against it. If someone leaves, then they leave. If someone stays, then they stay. If companionship arrives, then welcome it. If companionship departs, then release it. Your task remains unchanged. Maintain virtue. Maintain reason. Maintain self-command. Nothing more is required. The fear of being alone often hides another fear. The fear that your life lacks substance. When distractions disappear, you must confront what remains. Many people discover they have neglected themselves for years. They know everything about others and very little about their own mind. They have studied the opinions of strangers but ignored their own character. They have managed appearances while neglecting principles. They have built social lives while failing to build inner lives. Then solitude arrives and exposes the imbalance. Do not resent this exposure. Welcome it. Truth revealed is an opportunity. Truth hidden is a danger. The moment you recognize a weakness, you gain the chance to strengthen it. The moment you recognize dependence, you gain the chance to reduce it. The moment you recognize fear, you gain the chance to confront it. Nothing valuable begins with avoidance. Everything valuable begins with honest observation. This is why solitude matters. Not because isolation is superior to companionship, but because self-knowledge is impossible without periods of deliberate withdrawal. You must occasionally step away from noise to hear your own judgments. You must occasionally step away from crowds to examine your own conduct. You must occasionally stand alone to discover whether your happiness stands on solid ground. If it collapses the moment company disappears, then the foundation was weak. Better to discover this now than later. Many spend decades avoiding this discovery. Then old age arrives. The distractions fade. The crowds diminish. The opportunities narrow. And suddenly they are forced to meet the person they have avoided their entire lives. The meeting is painful because it was postponed too long. Do not make the same mistake. Meet yourself now. Examine yourself now. Correct yourself now. Life is uncertain. Time is limited. Every day spent escaping yourself is a day surrendered unnecessarily. Every day spent strengthening yourself becomes an investment that cannot be lost. The goal is not to become indifferent to people. The goal is to become free. There is a difference. The free person can enjoy companionship without depending upon it. The free person can love without clinging. The free person can appreciate others without surrendering themselves. The free person remains whole whether alone or accompanied. This is genuine strength, not the strength that dominates others, the strength that governs itself. Imagine two people sitting alone in identical rooms. One feels abandoned, the other feels peaceful. The room is the same. The silence is the same. The difference exists entirely within the mind. One believes happiness has been taken away. The other understands happiness was never located outside. This understanding changes how life is lived. When you stop demanding that others complete you, your relationships improve. When you stop using people as protection against your own thoughts, your interactions become honest. When you stop seeking rescue, your character begins developing. You meet others from strength rather than need. You share life rather than consume it. You appreciate companionship without making it responsible for your happiness. This is the proper order. First govern yourself, then engage with others, not the reverse. Do not wait until you feel ready. Begin now. The next time silence arrives, resist the urge to escape. Remain there, observe, learn, examine. The next time loneliness appears, do not immediately seek distraction. Investigate it. Ask what judgment created it. Ask what expectation lies beneath it. Ask what fear is demanding attention. Then bring reason to the situation. Bring honesty. Bring discipline. Little by little the fear will weaken. Not because circumstances changed, because understanding increased. And understanding is stronger than avoidance. One day you will sit alone and notice something unexpected. The anxiety is gone. The restlessness is gone. The desperate need for stimulation is gone. You are simply present. Not because the world became perfect. Not because every desire was satisfied. Because you finally stopped running. You finally accepted responsibility for your own peace. You finally learned that happiness cannot be borrowed from another person. It must be cultivated within. Remember this clearly. No crowd can save a person who fears themselves. No relationship can provide lasting peace to a person who refuses self-examination. No amount of attention can satisfy a mind that has not learned self-command. The work is internal. The responsibility is personal. The opportunity is available right now. Do not waste it. The person you avoid in solitude is the very person you must come to know. The thoughts you avoid examining are the thoughts that govern your life from the shadows. The fears you avoid confronting are the fears that quietly direct your choices. Turn toward them. Look carefully. Judge honestly. Correct patiently. This is the path. Not easy, not comfortable, but worthy. And when the day ends and you stand alone with yourself, there will be no greater victory than knowing you no longer need to escape your own company. For the person who can sit quietly with themselves, in truth, possesses something rare, a mind that is no longer ruled by fear, a character that no longer depends on circumstance, a life directed by reason, and a happiness that remains steady whether the room is full of people or completely empty. Number 2. Separate what depends on you from others. Listen carefully to what you are about to hear, because most of your frustration has been built on a single invisible mistake you repeat every day without noticing it. You place ownership over things that were never yours, and then you suffer when reality refuses to obey your claims. You treat other people's choices as if they were extensions of your will. You treat outcomes as if your desire alone should be enough to shape them. And when life does what life always does, you call it unfair, you call it disappointing, you call it painful. But the pain is not born from the event itself. It is born from confusion about what belongs to you and what never did. This confusion is the root of inner disturbance. Until you correct it, no amount of success, no change in environment, no improvement in relationships will give you lasting stability, because wherever you go, you will carry the same error with you. You will keep investing your peace into things that move without your permission, and anything you invest in what you do not control becomes fragile by design. Start here with absolute honesty. Only one domain in life is fully yours. Your judgment, your intention, your choice in this present moment. Not your reputation, not your body's comfort, not other people's behavior, not the outcome of your effort, not the past, not the future. These are shaped by countless forces outside your command. You influence them, yes, but influence is not control, and confusing the two is the beginning of endless inner conflict. The moment you wake up, your mind immediately begins assigning ownership to external things. You think about how others might treat you today. You think about whether your work will be appreciated. You think about whether circumstances will cooperate. And without realizing it, you begin the day already dependent on factors you cannot govern. This is why so many people feel anxious before anything has even happened. They have already surrendered control to imagined outcomes. Now observe your own reactions more closely. When someone ignores you, your mind creates meaning. When something does not go your way, your mind creates judgment. When plans break, your mind creates a story about loss. But notice carefully, none of these reactions come from the event alone. They come from the interpretation you attach to it. The event is neutral, your judgment gives it weight, and what your judgment gives weight to determines your emotional state. This is where discipline begins, not in changing the world, not in controlling others, but in separating the raw event from the meaning you add to it. The event belongs to external reality, the meaning belongs to you, and only one of these can be trained directly. When you fail to separate them, you become reactive. You argue with reality instead of understanding it. You demand that people behave differently so that you can feel stable. You expect outcomes to align with your preference so that your mind can relax. This is not strength. It is dependence disguised as expectation. Look at your relationships through this lens. How often do you silently assign responsibility for your emotional state to another person? How often do you believe their tone, their attention, their presence, or their absence determines your worth or peace? The truth is harder but clearer. Their behavior belongs to them. Your reaction belongs to you. When you merge the two, you lose clarity and gain suffering. The same applies to work, success, and recognition. You prepare, you act, you invest effort. These are within your domain. But whether others approve, whether results unfold as expected, whether recognition arrives, these are not guaranteed extensions of effort. They are outcomes shaped by many forces. When you confuse effort with guaranteed outcome, disappointment becomes inevitable, not because life is unjust, but because your expectation was misaligned with reality. The disciplined mind performs action without demanding control over results. It understands that action is internal, while outcome is external. This separation removes the emotional volatility that comes from attachment. You still act with full commitment, but you no longer chain your peace to what happens afterward. Now consider how often your suffering comes from attempting to control what is not yours. You try to control how others perceive you. You try to control whether people understand you. You try to control whether situations remain stable. You try to control whether life feels predictable. And when control fails, frustration appears. But the failure was never in life. The failure was in the assignment of control to the wrong domain. The practical correction begins the moment you notice a judgment forming. A judgment always appears before emotional reaction. It is subtle. It sounds like a conclusion about what something means. This should not be happening. This person should not behave this way. This outcome is bad. This situation is unfair. These are not facts. These are interpretations, and every interpretation must be questioned before it becomes belief. Train yourself to pause at that exact point, not after the reaction, before it solidifies. Ask one simple question: is this within my control or not? If it is within your control, direct your attention there. If it is not, release it immediately. Do not negotiate with it. Do not emotionally wrestle with it. Do not rehearse it in imagination. Release it. This is not passive resignation. It is precise allocation of mental energy. Your mind is limited. Every moment you spend trying to control what belongs to others is a moment stolen from governing what belongs to you. And what belongs to you is the only place where transformation is possible. When you begin this practice, you will notice resistance. The mind does not easily give up imagined control. It prefers illusion over clarity because illusion feels safer in the short term. It gives the feeling of influence where none exists. But this feeling is deceptive. It drains you while offering no real power. And the longer you hold on to it, the more exhausted you become. To strengthen this discipline, begin each morning with a simple internal preparation. Before engaging with the world, remind yourself that everything outside your judgment is external. People you meet today are external. Events that unfold are external. Praise and criticism are external. Health fluctuations are external. Only your choice in response is internal. This reminder is not theoretical, it is training. It sets the boundary of responsibility before the day begins. Then commit to one principle for the day. In every situation, respond based on what is within your control. Not what you wish were controllable, not what you fear might happen, only what is directly yours. This anchors your attention in reality rather than imagination. During the day when disruption occurs, return to the separation immediately. Something is said to you that feels unfair. Something fails unexpectedly. Something goes differently than planned. At that moment, do not expand the situation into a narrative. Break it into two parts: the external event and your internal response. One is fixed. The other is flexible. One is given, the other is chosen. Most people invert this. They try to fix what is given and neglect what is chosen. They attempt to control the external while neglecting the internal. This inversion produces constant tension. The disciplined person reverses this order. They accept the external as it is and refine the internal response until it aligns with reason. Even your emotions must be examined through this separation. Emotion itself is not the enemy, it is information, but interpretation determines whether emotion becomes guidance or disturbance. Anger arises when judgment declares that reality must not be as it is. Anxiety arises when judgment claims certainty over what is unknown. Sadness arises when judgment interprets loss as collapse rather than transition. In each case, the emotion is secondary, the judgment is primary. Therefore, do not attempt to suppress emotion. Examine the judgment that produced it. Ask whether the judgment reflects reality or preference. If it reflects preference, recognize it as optional, not binding. You are allowed to prefer outcomes, you are not entitled to them. As this practice deepens, you begin to notice a shift in your inner stability. Situations still occur, but they no longer dictate your state of mind. People still behave unpredictably, but they no longer destabilize your identity. Outcomes still vary, but they no longer determine your sense of worth. This is the beginning of inner independence. At the end of the day, conduct a review not of events, but of control. Where did you confuse what is yours with what is not? Where did you react as if external events had authority over your peace? Where did you assign importance to things outside your governance? This review is not for self-criticism, it is for correction. Precision improves through repetition. Over time, something fundamental changes. You stop negotiating with reality. You stop demanding that life behave according to expectation. You begin to see events as material for practice rather than threats to stability. Every external occurrence becomes a test of judgment. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to refine perception. Every disruption becomes training for clarity. This is the practical freedom that comes from separating what depends on you from what does not. It does not remove difficulty from life, it removes confusion from response. And confusion, not difficulty, is what creates suffering. When this understanding becomes stable, your relationships change without effort. You no longer cling to people in order to secure emotional stability. You no longer demand from them what they cannot give. You engage with them fully, but without dependency. You appreciate their presence without turning it into a necessity for peace. Your work becomes cleaner as well. You no longer sabotage effort by obsessing over outcomes. You act with seriousness, then release attachment to results. This allows consistent effort without emotional collapse when results vary. You remain steady whether recognition comes or not. Most importantly, your mind becomes less crowded. It no longer attempts to manage the entire world in thought. It returns to its proper task, governing judgment, choosing response, aligning action with reason. Everything else is left where it belongs. This is the discipline being asked of you, not perfection, not control over life, but precision in understanding what is yours and what is not. The moment you fully accept this division, you regain clarity, and clarity is the foundation of a life no longer ruled by reaction. You will still face uncertainty, you will still encounter disappointment, you will still meet resistance, but none of these will own your mind, because you will no longer offer your mind to things that cannot hold it. And in that space, something steady begins to form. Not dependence on circumstances, not dependence on others, but a quiet, unwavering confidence in your ability to respond correctly to whatever arrives. That is the only control worth having. Number 3. Accept solitude as training for inner freedom. You resist solitude as if it were emptiness, when in truth it is exposure. And what it exposes is not weakness in the world around you, but weakness in how you govern your own mind. When no one is speaking to you, no one is approving you, no one is reacting to you, something uncomfortable rises. Your thoughts begin to speak without interruption, your judgments begin to move without distraction, and suddenly you see what has always been there, only previously covered by noise. This is why solitude feels heavy to the undisciplined mind. It removes the external scaffolding you have been leaning on to avoid yourself. Without conversation, without attention, without input, the mind is left alone with its own structure. And if that structure is unstable, silence becomes unbearable. not because silence is harmful, but because it reveals what has not been trained. You have been practicing avoidance without noticing it. Every moment you reach for distraction, the instant stillness appears, is a training session in dependence. Every impulse to escape your own presence is a small reinforcement of the belief that you are not enough for yourself, and over time this becomes habitual. You begin to believe that peace must arrive from outside because you have never allowed it to form within uninterrupted awareness. Solitude is not punishment, it is diagnostic. It shows you the condition of your judgments without interference from other people's opinions. When you are alone, there is no one to validate your interpretations. There is no one to correct or confirm your assumptions. What remains is raw mental activity, unfiltered and unmasked. If you are restless here, the restlessness did not begin with solitude, it was only revealed by it. Most suffering that appears in isolation is not caused by isolation itself. It is caused by unexamined thought patterns that suddenly become audible. You begin to replay past conversations. You begin to anticipate future scenarios. You begin to assign meaning to events that are not even present. And because there is no external anchor, these thoughts appear larger than they truly are. The mind, when undirected, exaggerates its own content. This is where discipline must begin. Not in changing what solitude is, but in changing how you relate to the thoughts that appear within it. You are not required to obey every mental movement. You are not required to follow every narrative that arises. You are not required to treat every imagined scenario as reality. These are habits, not truths. And habits can be retrained. The first correction is simple but demanding. Stop confusing thought with authority. A thought is not a command. A thought is not a fact. A thought is an event occurring within the mind, no different in principle from any external occurrence. It arrives, it can be observed, and it can be evaluated, but it does not automatically deserve action or belief. In solitude, this becomes visible. You sit alone and a thought appears that something is missing. Another thought appears that you should be elsewhere. Another thought appears that your current life is insufficient. If you treat each of these as truth, you immediately lose stability. But if you treat them as material for examination, solitude becomes training ground for clarity. This is the real function of being alone. It is not to create happiness. It is to reveal whether your happiness depends on untested assumptions. If your peace collapses in silence, then your peace was never rooted in understanding. It was rooted in stimulation, and stimulation is never stable. Begin to observe how quickly the mind tries to fill space. In solitude, there is a gap where external input used to be. The mind rushes to occupy it. It produces commentary, memory, anticipation, judgment. This is not insight. This is resistance to stillness. And if you follow it uncritically, you remain trapped in reaction even when nothing is happening. The disciplined response is not suppression. It is observation without participation. You notice the thought without merging with it. You see the impulse without obeying it. You recognize the emotional tone without becoming it. This separation is the foundation of inner freedom. Without it, you are simply carried by mental activity. With it, you begin to govern it. Solitude makes this practice unavoidable. In social settings, distraction hides the pattern. In silence, the pattern becomes obvious. That is why many people avoid being alone. They do not fear emptiness. They fear recognition of how undirected their attention actually is. They fear seeing how quickly they surrender authority over their own mind. But what you avoid mastering will continue directing you. If you refuse to observe your thoughts in solitude, those same thoughts will govern you in crowds. If you refuse to examine your judgments in silence, those judgments will control your reactions in conversation. There is no separation between private discipline and public stability. One determines the other. So treat solitude as deliberate training rather than accidental isolation. Choose it. Enter it with intention. Do not approach it as absence of company. Approach it as presence of yourself. You are not lacking something in solitude. You are encountering what you usually ignore. At the beginning, resistance will appear. The mind will insist that you should be doing something more productive or more engaging. It will frame silence as waste. It will suggest that meaning exists only in interaction. These are not truths. They are avoidance strategies. Their purpose is to restore distraction, not to improve your life. Do not negotiate with this resistance. Recognize it as a reflex of an undisciplined mind. Stay seated, stay attentive. Allow the discomfort to exist without converting it into action. This is where strength begins to form, not in changing what you feel, but in refusing to be governed by immediate impulses. As you continue this practice, something subtle changes. Thoughts begin to lose their urgency, emotional spikes begin to soften. The mind stops treating every internal event as an emergency. You begin to see that most mental activity is repetitive and unstructured. It demands attention, but it rarely deserves it. This recognition reduces dependence on external stimulation. You no longer need constant input to feel stable. You no longer require continuous interaction to maintain clarity. You begin to experience that stability can exist without reinforcement from others. This is the early form of inner independence. But this independence is not achieved by rejecting the world. It is achieved by understanding it correctly. External life continues. People continue to come and go. Situations continue to change, but your mind is no longer organized around constant reaction to them. Instead, it returns to a central point of observation before responding. This return is essential. Without it, solitude becomes either discomfort or escape. With it, solitude becomes practice. Each return to observation strengthens your ability to distinguish between what is occurring and what you are adding to it. And this distinction is the core of rational living. You must also examine how often your desire for companionship is actually a desire to avoid mental responsibility. When others are present, attention is divided. When others are present, silence is filled. When others are present, self-examination is delayed. This is why some people feel uncomfortable when alone. They are suddenly required to face the mind they have not trained. Do not interpret this as a reason to reject others. Interpret it as a reason to strengthen yourself. The goal is not isolation from people. The goal is independence from compulsive dependence on their presence for mental stability. A well-trained mind can be alone without collapse and with others without loss of self-command. To build this, establish a daily period of intentional solitude, not as escape, but as structured examination. Sit without input and observe how the mind behaves when not guided by external influence. Do not judge the thoughts as good or bad. Simply note how they arise and pass. Over time, patterns will become visible. These patterns are where your real work begins. In the morning, before engaging with the world, remind yourself that you will encounter external events that are not yours to control. People will act according to their own reasoning. Situations will unfold according to their own causes. Your task is not to shape all of this. Your task is to respond with clarity when it appears. This preparation reduces the shock of unpredictability. Throughout the day, whenever mental disturbance arises, return briefly to solitude within the mind. Even in the presence of others, step back internally. Observe the thought before reacting. Ask whether it requires response or release. This internal pause is a form of practiced solitude that preserves clarity even in activity. At the end of the day, review how often you were governed by reaction instead of observation. Notice where impulses led you without examination. Notice where thoughts were accepted without question. This review is not for regret. It is for refinement. Each observation becomes data for strengthening awareness. Over time, solitude stops feeling like absence and begins to feel like structure. It becomes the space where your mind is trained to return to itself. And once this return becomes familiar, you are no longer dependent on external conditions to maintain stability. This is the transformation solitude offers when approached correctly. Not isolation from life, but freedom within it. Not rejection of others, but independence from compulsive reliance. Not emptiness, but clarity. And in that clarity, a mind begins to form that no longer fears its own presence because it has finally learned how to govern it. Number 4. Govern your thoughts before seeking external comfort. You keep reaching outward for relief before you have examined what is happening within you. This is the silent mistake that governs most of your suffering. A thought arises, and before you question it, you look for comfort. A feeling appears, and before you understand it, you try to escape it. A disturbance forms in the mind, and instead of taking command of it, you search for something outside yourself to quiet it. In doing so, you hand authority over your inner life to whatever is closest, easiest, or most distracting. But nothing external can stabilize a mind that has not been governed internally. You are trying to soothe what you have not yet understood. You are trying to fix what you have not yet examined. And this is why comfort never lasts. It only pauses the disturbance without removing its cause. The cause is always the same: untrained judgment. You see an event and immediately assign meaning to it. You hear words and instantly decide what they imply. You feel discomfort and immediately conclude something has gone wrong. These judgments are not reflections of reality. They are interpretations formed faster than reason can intervene. And once they are accepted without examination, they begin directing your emotional state. Notice how quickly your mind moves from perception to reaction. There is almost no space between what happens and how you respond internally. That gap is where discipline is supposed to exist. Instead, it is usually filled with automatic thought, and automatic thought, left unchecked, becomes the hidden ruler of your life. When you feel discomfort, your instinct is to seek relief. Conversation, distraction, reassurance, stimulation, these are not in themselves harmful, but they become harmful when they are used to avoid examining the mind that produced the discomfort. You treat the symptom while ignoring the cause, and so the pattern repeats endlessly. The disciplined life begins when you reverse this sequence. Before seeking anything external, you turn inward and examine the thought that created the disturbance. You do not obey it immediately. You do not reject it immediately. You observe it. You question it. You test whether it reflects reality or merely assumption. Most mental suffering does not survive this examination. It dissolves when seen clearly, but it only dissolves when it is seen clearly. Not when it is avoided, not when it is covered, not when it is distracted away. Clarity is the only force that weakens false judgment. You must learn to pause at the exact moment where impulse begins. That moment is subtle. It is the instant where you feel the urge to escape discomfort. That urge is not guidance, it is reaction, and reaction is not authority, it is habit. If you act from it without reflection, you reinforce dependence on external relief instead of internal governance. To govern your thoughts is to place reason before response, not after, not during emotional escalation, before. You observe what has entered your mind and you ask whether it deserves acceptance. You do not assume every thought is trustworthy. You treat thoughts as impressions that require evaluation, not commands that require obedience. This shift changes the structure of your inner life. Instead of being carried by each mental wave, you begin standing behind it as observer. You begin recognizing that the appearance of a thought is not the same as its validity. Many thoughts appear simply because habit produces them, not because truth demands them. When you fail to govern your thoughts, external comfort becomes your fallback system. You look outward for what should have been handled inwardly. You seek reassurance when you should be seeking clarity. You seek distraction when you should be seeking understanding. And each time you do this, you delay the development of inner strength. Comfort does not correct judgment. It only numbs its effects. And what is numbed returns unchanged. This is why people can spend years repeating the same emotional cycles. The external solutions shift, but the internal pattern remains untouched. The Stoic approach is more demanding but more precise. It requires you to treat every disturbance as a signal that a judgment needs examination, not suppression, not escape, examination. You ask what assumption created this reaction. You ask whether that assumption is within your control or outside it. You ask whether it is based on fact or interpretation, and in doing so you begin to reclaim authority over your own mind. In the morning, before you engage with the world, prepare your mind for this practice. Remind yourself that the day will present impressions that will try to shape your reactions. People will behave in ways you do not expect. Situations will unfold without regard for your preference. Your role is not to prevent this. Your role is to govern your interpretation of it. Set a clear intention that no external impression will be accepted without examination. This is not rigidity, it is awareness. It is the decision to stop living as a passive recipient of mental events. Throughout the day, you will feel the pull toward immediate comfort. Something unpleasant will happen, and your mind will reach for escape. A conversation, a device, a distraction, anything that reduces the intensity of the moment. This is the critical point of training. Instead of moving outward immediately, pause and return inward. Ask what thought just occurred. Identify the judgment behind the feeling. Separate the event from the interpretation. The event is external. The interpretation belongs to you. Only one of these can be corrected directly, and it is not the external event. When you consistently practice this separation, you begin to notice something important. Most emotional distress is not caused by the world itself. It is caused by your immediate interpretation of the world. And once you see this clearly, you stop treating emotions as uncontrollable forces. You begin treating them as responses shaped by your reasoning. This does not mean you eliminate emotion. It means you understand its origin. Emotion becomes information rather than authority. It signals where your judgment requires attention. It is no longer a master directing your actions. It becomes a subject for examination. There will be resistance to this practice. The mind prefers comfort over clarity. Comfort requires no effort. Clarity requires discipline. Comfort allows immediate relief. Clarity demands patience. Because of this, the mind will often argue that examination is unnecessary or that relief should come first. But if you follow this argument, you remain unchanged. You must be willing to endure temporary discomfort for the sake of long-term stability. This is not punishment, it is training. Just as physical strength requires resistance, mental strength requires the ability to remain present with discomfort without immediately dissolving it through external means. At the end of the day, review how often you sought external comfort before examining internal judgment. Do not judge yourself harshly. Observe honestly. Where did you react before understanding? Where did you escape before analyzing? Where did you accept a thought without questioning it? These are the points of correction. Over time, you will notice that the need for external comfort decreases, not because life becomes easier, but because your dependence on immediate relief weakens. You begin to trust your ability to understand rather than escape, And this trust is what stabilizes the mind. A governed mind does not require constant external reassurance. It does not collapse at the first sign of discomfort. It does not outsource its stability to changing conditions. Instead, it remains anchored in the practice of examination. Every impression is evaluated, every judgment is tested, every reaction is refined. This is the foundation of inner authority. Not control over the world, control over interpretation. And once interpretation is governed, external conditions lose their power to destabilize you. You are not being asked to eliminate comfort from your life. You are being asked to stop making comfort the first response to inner disturbance. First comes examination, then comes action. Sometimes that action may include rest or relief, but it is chosen, not automatic. It is guided by reason, not impulse. This distinction is what transforms a reactive mind into a disciplined one. And only a disciplined mind can remain steady regardless of circumstance. Number 5. Strengthen character through daily reflection and discipline. You keep thinking character is something revealed in rare moments of crisis, but that is not where it is formed. Character is built in the quiet repetition of how you respond to ordinary moments, and in the private honesty of how you review yourself when no one is watching. If your days are scattered, reactive, and unexamined, then your character is not weak by accident. It is weak by neglect. Every day you live through hundreds of small decisions. You react to words without reflection. You accept judgments without testing them. You pursue comfort without questioning whether it strengthens you. You repeat complaints without examining whether they are justified. Each of these moments is shaping your inner structure, not dramatically, not visibly, but steadily. And what is repeated becomes who you are. This is why reflection is not optional. It is the mechanism through which a mind corrects its own direction. Without it, you drift. With it, you return. Without it, you inherit habits. With it, you choose discipline. But reflection must be honest, not decorative. It must expose your thinking, not comfort it. If you approach it with softness toward your own errors, you will preserve the same errors under the illusion of self-awareness. Look at how often your reactions happen faster than your understanding. Something is said, and you respond emotionally before you understand what you are responding to. Something is lost, and you immediately conclude meaning before examining whether that meaning is justified. Something does not go your way, and you attach judgment before you separate fact from interpretation. This speed of reaction is what keeps your mind untrained. A disciplined life begins when reaction is interrupted by reflection, not delayed until later, but inserted in the moment itself. A pause where you refuse to act on the first impulse of judgment. In that pause, you examine what just appeared in your mind. You ask whether it is accurate or merely habitual. You ask whether it belongs to reason or to impulse. This is the beginning of self-governance. Morning is where this discipline must be established. Before you enter the noise of other people's expectations, you set the structure of your own thinking. You remind yourself that the day will present impressions that will attempt to guide your reactions. Some will be pleasant, some will be difficult, but none of them should be accepted without examination. You decide in advance that your mind will not be passive. This is not about controlling events. It is about controlling interpretation. Events will continue to arise without permission. Words will be spoken. Situations will shift. Circumstances will unfold according to forces far beyond your reach. But your interpretation of these events is not automatic unless you allow it to be. And allowing it is the source of instability. Throughout the day, your mind will attempt to conserve energy by using shortcuts. It will label things quickly so it does not have to think deeply. It will form judgments based on habit so it does not have to examine carefully. It will repeat familiar complaints because they require no effort. This is how mental laziness disguises itself as normal thinking. To strengthen character, you must resist this automation. You must slow down the process of judgment. When something happens, do not immediately assign meaning. First observe what actually occurred. Then separate what is known from what is assumed. Only after this separation do you decide how to respond. This discipline transforms reaction into reasoning. Most people believe their suffering comes from external events, but external events are only triggers. The actual suffering comes from unexamined interpretation. Two people can experience the same situation and respond completely differently. One collapses into frustration, the other remains steady. The difference is not the event. The difference is the trained or untrained mind. This is why reflection at the end of the day is essential. You must look back not to relive events, but to examine your responses. Where did you react without understanding? Where did you accept a judgment without questioning it? Where did you allow emotion to lead before reason intervened? These are the points where character is either strengthened or weakened. Do not approach this review as self-punishment. That would only repeat the same emotional instability you are trying to correct. Approach it as correction of a system that produces output based on input, must be adjusted when the output is unstable. Your thoughts and reactions are outputs. Your judgments are inputs. Reflection is the adjustment process. When you examine your day, focus on precision rather than emotion. Do not ask whether you felt good or bad. Ask whether your responses were governed by reason or by impulse. Ask whether your judgments were based on fact or assumption. Ask whether you acted from clarity or from reaction. This removes the noise of emotional bias and brings attention to structure. Over time, this practice reveals patterns. You begin to notice recurring judgments that consistently distort your perception. You begin to see habitual reactions that repeat across different situations. You begin to recognize how often you outsource your peace to external approval or external conditions. These patterns are not accidents. They are uncorrected habits. Once you see them clearly, you are no longer blind to them, and what is seen clearly can be changed, but change does not happen through intention alone. It happens through disciplined interruption. Each time the pattern appears, you interrupt it with reflection before action. You insert awareness where habit would normally operate automatically. This is how character is strengthened, not through occasional insight, but through repeated correction, not through inspiration, but through disciplined attention. Every interruption of automatic reaction is a reinforcement of rational control. Every moment of reflection before judgment is a small restoration of inner authority. You will notice resistance when you begin this practice. The mind prefers efficiency over accuracy. It prefers immediate reaction over careful examination. It prefers familiar patterns over conscious adjustment. This resistance is not a sign to stop. It is a sign that training has begun. Stay consistent with reflection, even when it feels unnecessary, especially when it feels unnecessary, because that feeling is itself a habit of avoidance. The mind that avoids reflection is the same mind that repeats its errors. The mind that embraces reflection begins to correct itself. In time, something changes in how you experience daily life. Situations no longer carry the same emotional weight, not because they are less significant, but because your interpretation of them becomes more precise. You stop exaggerating outcomes. You stop collapsing into immediate judgment. You stop confusing impression with truth. This precision creates stability, and stability is what allows character to become visible in action. You are no longer driven by fluctuating reactions. You are guided by examined judgment, and examined judgment produces consistent behavior, even in changing conditions. At the beginning of each day, remind yourself that your task is not to control what happens, but to govern how you interpret what happens. At the end of each day, verify whether you upheld this task. Between these 2 points lies the practice that builds character. Character is not declared, it is not claimed, it is not performed for others, it is constructed through the private alignment of thought and reason, repeated daily until it becomes stable, and once stable, it no longer depends on circumstance. A life governed by reflection is a life no longer ruled by reaction. And a mind that no longer reacts blindly is a mind that begins to stand firmly within itself, regardless of what the world presents. Number 6. Practice contentment with what reason already provides. You keep measuring your life against what is absent, instead of recognizing what reason already places within your reach. This is why contentment feels distant even when nothing essential is missing. You have trained your attention to scan for lack rather than to recognize sufficiency. And a mind trained in lack will never arrive at rest, because it will always find something else to demand. Reason does not promise abundance in external conditions. It does not guarantee comfort, approval, or perfect outcomes. What it provides is far more stable. It provides clarity about what is enough for a rational and disciplined life. But you repeatedly ignore this provision because you have been conditioned to equate satisfaction with accumulation rather than understanding. Look closely at your daily mental activity. You begin with what you already have and immediately shift attention toward what you believe should be added. Something slightly inconvenient appears, and you interpret it as deficiency. Something mildly uncomfortable occurs, and you interpret it as failure. Something uncertain arises, and you interpret it as instability. These interpretations are not facts. They are habits of dissatisfaction operating faster than reason can correct them. Contentment is not the denial of desire. It is the governance of desire by reason. Without this governance, desire expands without limit. Each fulfilled desire becomes a platform for the next. Each achieved outcome becomes insufficient shortly after arrival. And so you live in continuous pursuit, never pausing long enough to recognize that the pursuit itself is built on misjudgment. Reason already provides a foundation for sufficiency. It tells you what is within your control and what is not. It tells you that virtue lies in the quality of your judgment, not in external accumulation. It tells you that stability comes from disciplined thought, not from changing circumstances. But you often disregard this guidance because it does not satisfy immediate impulse. You must examine the way you interpret ordinary life. When you wake up, you likely do not begin with recognition of sufficiency. You begin with assessment of what is missing. This habit is subtle but powerful. It turns every moment into comparison. It transforms presence into dissatisfaction, and it ensures that no external improvement will ever resolve the internal pattern. The disciplined mind begins from a different position. It begins with acknowledgement of what reason already allows you to possess in any circumstance. The ability to choose your judgment, the ability to act according to principle, the ability to withhold agreement from false impressions. These are not dependent on external conditions. They are always available, yet they are often ignored because they are not dramatic. You have been taught by habit to value what is visible over what is essential, but reason does not operate according to visibility. It operates according to necessity for a stable life, and what is necessary is not endless addition, but correct alignment of thought with reality. When you feel dissatisfaction arise, do not immediately accept its conclusion. Pause and identify what judgment is forming beneath it. Ask whether that judgment is comparing reality to an imagined alternative. Most dissatisfaction is built on this comparison. Reality is present. Imagination introduces what is not present. The gap between the two becomes discomfort, not because reality is insufficient, but because expectation has been inflated beyond what is reasonable. This is where contentment must be trained, not by forcing acceptance of everything, but by removing unnecessary comparison. You do not need to deny that life could be different. You only need to recognize that your peace does not depend on it being different. This distinction is essential. It separates preference from dependency, and dependency is what destroys contentment. Throughout the day, your mind will repeatedly attempt to escape what is present by imagining what is better. This is a form of mental displacement. Instead of engaging with reality, you replace it with projection. And while projection may feel temporarily stimulating, it weakens your capacity to recognize sufficiency where it already exists. To correct this, bring your attention back to what reason confirms as adequate for this moment, not what imagination demands, not what comparison suggests, but what is actually within your control and already available. Your ability to think clearly, your ability to choose your response, your ability to act with integrity in this situation. These are sufficient starting points for any circumstance. When you train yourself to recognize this sufficiency repeatedly, the urgency of external desire begins to soften. You still prefer comfort, you still prefer ease, but you no longer confuse preference with necessity. This is where emotional stability begins to form. Because necessity creates pressure, but preference does not need to dominate the mind. Most dissatisfaction comes from elevating preference into necessity. You prefer recognition and then behave as if recognition is required for peace. You prefer comfort and then behave as if discomfort is unacceptable. You prefer certainty and then behave as if uncertainty is dangerous. Each transformation of preference into necessity creates unnecessary inattention. Reason corrects this distortion by reminding you that external conditions are not required for virtue. You can act rightly regardless of circumstance. You can think clearly regardless of outcome. You can maintain integrity regardless of recognition. Once you accept this fully, the pressure to constantly alter external reality decreases. Begin each morning by identifying what is already sufficient for a rational life. Not in abstract terms, but in direct awareness. You have the capacity to govern your thoughts. You have the ability to choose your actions. You have the present moment in which to practice discipline. These are not small things. They are the foundation of every meaningful life. Then prepare yourself for the appearance of dissatisfaction during the day. Do not assume contentment will remain without effort. The mind will attempt to disrupt it through comparison and expectation. When this occurs, recognize it immediately. Do not argue with it. Do not follow it. Identify it as a judgment that is attempting to redefine sufficiency. Ask whether this judgment reflects reason or desire without limit. If it reflects desire without limit, it is not guidance, it is distortion, and distortion cannot lead to stability. Only reason can. At the end of the day, review moments where contentment was lost. Not to blame yourself, but to understand where judgment shifted from sufficiency to comparison. This review strengthens awareness of how quickly the mind abandons what reason provides when it is not monitored. Over time, something important changes. You begin to notice that many of the things you once believed were necessary are not necessary at all. You begin to see that peace was never blocked by lack of external addition, but by internal refusal to recognize sufficiency. And once this is seen clearly, the structure of desire changes. You still engage with the world. You still act, strive, and improve. But you no longer believe that your inner stability depends on achieving specific external states. You begin to act from clarity rather than deficiency, and action rooted in clarity produces far less inner conflict. Contentment then becomes a byproduct of correct reasoning, rather than a goal constantly pursued and missed. It arises when the mind stops arguing with what is already present and begins working only with what is within its control. This is the practice you return to repeatedly, not to reduce life, but to remove unnecessary dissatisfaction from it, not to withdraw from ambition, but to separate ambition from dependence. not to reject desire, but to place it under the guidance of reason. When this discipline is steady, life no longer feels like a constant lack waiting to be filled. It becomes a field of action governed by clarity, where sufficiency is recognized in what is already given, and improvement is pursued without inner unrest. Number 7. Reject dependence on praise, attention, and approval. You are more dependent on approval than you are willing to admit. Not in dramatic moments, but in the quiet shaping of your daily choices. You adjust your words slightly so they sound more acceptable. You hesitate before expressing what you actually think. You refine your behavior in real time, based on imagined reactions from others. And without noticing it, you begin living as if other people's opinions are the measure of your worth. This dependence does not announce itself loudly. It operates through subtle internal adjustments. A glance from someone changes your tone. A comment changes your confidence. A lack of response changes your sense of value. You begin to interpret attention as validation and absence of attention as rejection, and in doing so you surrender authority over your inner state to forces you cannot control. You must see this clearly. The approval of others is not a stable foundation for a rational life. It is inconsistent, shaped by moods, biases, misunderstandings, and circumstances beyond your reach. If your peace rises and falls with it, then your peace is not your own. It is borrowed, and anything borrowed can be taken without warning. The mind that depends on praise becomes reactive. It begins to anticipate approval before acting. It begins to avoid disapproval before choosing. It begins to filter truth through the imagined reaction of others. And slowly, without resistance, you stop acting from reason and begin acting from expectation. This is where self-deception takes root. You tell yourself you are choosing freely, yet your choices are shaped by anticipated judgment. You believe you are expressing yourself, yet you are moderating expression to maintain acceptance. You think you are living, yet you are continuously negotiating your image. This is not freedom, it is managed behavior under invisible pressure. You must return attention to what is actually within your control, your judgment, your intention, your choice of action. These are independent of external approval. They exist before any reaction from others and remain unchanged regardless of how others respond. Everything else is secondary. When you understand this, praise loses its authority, not because it becomes meaningless, but because it becomes irrelevant to your inner governance. Praise may be pleasant, but it does not define correctness. Criticism may be uncomfortable, but it does not define failure. Both are external interpretations, not internal truths. You are not shaped by what others think of you. You are shaped by how you respond to your own judgments about what they think. This distinction is critical. Most people assume that external opinions directly affect them. In reality, it is their interpretation of those opinions that produces emotional disturbance. Begin to observe how often your mind checks for approval, even in small moments. When you speak, there is an internal scan for reaction. When you act, there is a silent anticipation of feedback. When you make a decision, there is a background concern about how it will be perceived. This constant monitoring reveals dependence that has become habitual. The disciplined mind interrupts this pattern at its root. Before acting, it examines intention without reference to external validation. It asks whether the action aligns with reason and virtue, not whether it will be well received. This shifts the center of gravity from outside perception to internal judgment. At the beginning of each day, you must remind yourself that approval is not the goal of action. Clarity of judgment is the goal. Integrity of intention is the goal. Alignment with reason is the goal. Whether others notice, understand, or praise is not within your domain. It may occur, or it may not. It cannot be the foundation of your stability. Throughout the day, situations will arise that test this discipline. You will feel the urge to adjust yourself to gain acceptance. You will feel hesitation when honesty might be misunderstood. You will feel discomfort when standing by your reasoning places you outside agreement. These moments are the precise points where dependence either weakens or strengthens. If you choose approval over truth, you reinforce dependence. If you choose reason over approval, you strengthen autonomy. The difference may appear small in the moment, but over time it determines whether your character is stable or fragmented. You must also recognize how praise distorts perception. When you depend on it, you begin to associate worth with reception. Positive feedback becomes inflated into validation of identity. Negative feedback becomes exaggerated into threat. Both reactions are distortions because neither praise nor criticism directly measures your inner quality. Your quality is determined by your judgment and your actions in accordance with reason. These remain constant regardless of external reaction. A correct action remains correct even if no one acknowledges it. An incorrect action remains incorrect even if everyone approves it. External response does not alter internal truth. To train this understanding, practice acting without immediate concern for how it will be received. Not carelessness, but independence from reaction. After acting, do not rush to evaluate yourself through external feedback. Instead, evaluate whether your action aligned with reason. This internal evaluation must become primary. You will notice discomfort when approval is absent. This discomfort is not evidence that something is wrong. It is evidence that dependence has been interrupted. The mind, accustomed to validation, experiences silence as instability. But if you remain steady through this discomfort, it begins to lose strength. At the same time, you must also be cautious with praise. It can quietly distort discipline by creating attachment to external reinforcement. When praise becomes desired, actions begin shifting toward what is rewarded rather than what is correct. This gradually replaces integrity with performance. The disciplined life requires you to detach both from fear of disapproval and desire for approval. Both are forms of external dependence. Both pull judgment away from reason. Both reduce autonomy. Whether attention is positive or negative, it must not become the basis of decision-making. At the end of the day, examine where your actions were influenced by anticipated judgment. Where did you adjust behavior to avoid criticism? Where did you shape words to gain approval? Where did you hesitate due to fear of perception? These are not failures to condemn. They are patterns to correct. This reflection must be precise. You are not evaluating whether people liked you. You are evaluating whether your actions were governed internally or externally. That distinction determines whether you are practicing self-command or surrendering it. Over time, consistent reflection weakens the automatic pull toward approval. You begin to notice that most situations do not require concern about perception at all. You begin to act with greater directness because you are no longer filtering behavior through imagined reactions. This produces clarity in communication and stability in decision-making. As this discipline strengthens, something important changes in your experience of relationships. You are no longer performing for acceptance. You are engaging from clarity. You are no longer adjusting your identity to fit expectation. You are expressing judgment without dependence on reaction. This creates relationships based on reality rather than performance. You also begin to notice that approval, when it comes, is no longer something you chase or cling to. It becomes incidental rather than essential. It passes through your experience without altering your foundation. And disapproval, when it comes, no longer destabilizes your sense of direction. This is the freedom that arises when external judgment loses authority over internal governance. Not indifference to others, but independence from their reactions as a measure of your worth. You remain attentive, responsible, and engaged, but no longer dependent. A mind governed by reason does not require constant affirmation. It requires clarity. And clarity is found internally through disciplined judgment. not externally through fluctuating opinion. Once this is understood and practiced, approval becomes optional rather than necessary. And in that shift, you regain something most people never consciously possess: a mind that acts without fear of rejection and without hunger for validation, a mind that moves according to reason alone, steady regardless of who is watching or what they think. Number 8. Cultivate virtue until companionship becomes unnecessary for peace. You keep treating companionship as if it were the foundation of peace, when in reality it is only an external condition that rises and falls without your permission. This is why your sense of stability is fragile. It depends on presence, attention, agreement, and response from others. And anything built on what you do not control will always remain unstable, no matter how carefully you arrange it. You must see the error clearly. You have been assigning the role of inner stability to external relationships. You expect people to provide what only disciplined judgment can produce. You expect presence to create peace. You expect attention to create value. You expect agreement to create certainty. And when these expectations are not met, you interpret it as loss rather than correction of misunderstanding. Virtue is not an abstract idea. It is the quality of your reasoning expressed in action. It is the discipline of choosing what is right according to understanding rather than impulse. It is the alignment of judgment with what is within your control. And it is the only part of life that does not depend on external cooperation. When you neglect virtue, you become dependent on circumstances to stabilize you. You rely on others to confirm your worth. You rely on interaction to quiet your mind. You rely on presence to avoid facing your own thoughts. And this creates a quiet form of instability that follows you even in moments of companionship. You must examine how often your desire for others is actually a desire to avoid yourself. Not the presence of people in itself, but the relief you expect from them. You want conversation to interrupt reflection. You want attention to interrupt uncertainty. You want agreement to interrupt doubt. But none of these interruptions resolve the underlying condition. They only delay it. The mind that has not been trained in virtue cannot remain stable alone, because it has not learned how to govern itself without external reference. It depends on feedback to feel coherent. It depends on interaction to feel grounded. It depends on validation to feel complete. And so solitude becomes threatening, not because solitude is harmful, but because it removes external scaffolding. Cultivating virtue changes this structure entirely. It shifts the source of stability inward. Instead of relying on how others respond, you rely on how you judge. Instead of depending on how situations unfold, you depend on how you act within them. Instead of needing confirmation, you develop clarity that does not require reinforcement. This does not mean rejecting people. It means no longer using people as the foundation of your peace. Companionship remains part of life, but it is no longer the condition for emotional stability. It becomes something you engage with, not something you depend on to maintain order within yourself. You must begin by observing how quickly your thoughts turn outward when discomfort arises. A moment of uncertainty appears, and your mind immediately looks for someone else to resolve it. A moment of emotional disturbance appears, and you seek interaction to dissolve it. A moment of doubt appears, and you search for reassurance. This reflex reveals dependence, not strength. To cultivate virtue, you must interrupt this reflex. Before seeking external resolution, you return to internal governance. You examine the thought that created the discomfort. You ask whether it is based on reason or assumption. You determine whether it concerns what is within your control or outside it. Only after this examination do you decide whether any external action is necessary. In the morning, set your intention clearly. You will not treat external responses as the measure of your stability. You will not allow emotional fluctuations to dictate your choices. You will not assign authority over your inner state to external presence or absence. Your focus will remain on judgment, intention, and action aligned with reason. As the day unfolds, you will encounter situations that test this commitment. People will respond in ways you did not expect. Conversations will shift in tone. Attention will increase or decrease unpredictably. If your peace depends on these changes, you will be disturbed repeatedly. But if your peace depends on virtue, these changes will not destabilize you. When you feel the pull toward emotional dependence, pause and identify the judgment beneath it. Ask what you are expecting from others in that moment. Ask whether that expectation is necessary for your stability or merely preferred for comfort. Then remind yourself that preference is not control, and control is not shared with others. This separation is essential. What belongs to you is your judgment and your response. What belongs to others is their perception and behavior. When you confuse these domains, you create dependency. When you separate them, you create clarity. As virtue strengthens, you begin to notice a shift in how solitude feels. It is no longer experienced as absence. It becomes the space where your judgment is visible without interference. You are no longer measuring yourself through external reflection. You are observing yourself directly. And this direct observation builds stability that does not require companionship to sustain it. You will also notice that relationships begin to change in quality. You are no longer entering them from need. You are no longer seeking completion through others. You are engaging from sufficiency of character. This removes pressure from interaction. It reduces emotional dependency. It allows others to be present without being responsible for your peace. At the same time, you must be honest about where virtue is still weak. There will be moments where you revert to seeking external reassurance, moments where silence feels uncomfortable and you reach outward automatically, moments where absence of attention feels like loss. These are not failures to hide. They are indicators of where discipline must be reinforced. At the end of each day, review these moments carefully. Do not focus on emotional intensity. Focus on structure of judgment. Where did you assign stability to external presence? Where did you assume that others were responsible for your emotional state? Where did you act from dependence instead of reason? This review strengthens awareness of where correction is needed. Over time, repetition of this practice reshapes your inner foundation. You begin to experience stability that does not fluctuate with social conditions. You are no longer defined by how often others are present or how they respond. You are defined by how consistently you govern your own judgment according to reason. Virtue becomes the center of your inner life, not as an ideal to admire, but as a practice to embody. It guides how you interpret events. It guides how you respond to people. It guides how you remain steady in both solitude and company. And once it becomes stable, companionship is no longer necessary for peace, because peace is no longer outsourced. You can still value others. You can still engage with them fully. You can still appreciate connection. But none of these are required for your inner order. They become additions, not foundations, enhancements, not dependencies. This is the transformation virtue brings, not separation from life, but independence within it. A mind governed by reason no longer collapses in absence of others because it has learned to remain upright through its own disciplined judgment. Number 9. Focus fully on present duties and responsibilities. You keep scattering your attention across imagined futures and unresolved pasts, while the only place where your life is actually being shaped sits directly in front of you. The present duty, the present responsibility, the present moment where your judgment becomes action, and yet you repeatedly abandon it in favor of mental time travel that produces no progress and only drains your clarity. This is how your mind has been governing you without permission. A thought about tomorrow appears and you leave today. A memory from yesterday arises and you leave today. A concern about outcomes you cannot control enters and you leave today. And every time you leave the present, you abandon the only domain where your will has real power. Everything else is imagination dressed as urgency. You must understand what duty actually is. It is not the total weight of your life. It is not the entire structure of your future. It is not every possibility that might unfold. Duty is only what is required of your judgment and action right now, nothing more. And nothing outside of the present moment can be acted upon with real control. Yet your thinking mind refuses this simplicity. It expands responsibility beyond its proper boundary. It turns one task into a network of imagined consequences. It turns one conversation into a projection of future outcomes. It turns one mistake into a narrative of identity. This expansion of thought creates emotional burden that does not belong to the present moment. The undisciplined mind confuses thinking about duty with performing duty. It believes that mental activity equals progress. But thinking without action is only simulation, and simulation cannot improve your life. Only present action aligned with reason can do that. You suffer not because duties are heavy, but because your attention is divided from them. While you are physically present in one task, your mind is often elsewhere negotiating imaginary scenarios. While you speak to someone, part of your attention is reviewing past interactions or anticipating future reactions. This division weakens your effectiveness and destabilizes your judgment. The disciplined life begins when you return attention to what is directly in front of you, without residue from what is not with resistance to thought, but with refusal to follow thought beyond its usefulness. A thought may arise, but it does not require pursuit. It requires evaluation. If it is relevant to present duty, it is used. If it is not, it is released. Each moment presents a duty that is smaller and more immediate than your mind tends to assume. Speak clearly in this conversation. Complete this task with attention. Respond to this situation with reason. These are not grand philosophical ideals. They are concrete expressions of discipline. And discipline is always local to the present. The reason you feel overwhelmed is not because life is too complex. It is because your attention is not properly assigned. You are trying to hold future responsibilities in present awareness, and this creates mental fragmentation. But future responsibility cannot be fulfilled now. Only preparation and present action can be fulfilled now. The rest is speculation. Begin your day by defining your scope correctly. You are responsible only for your present judgment and your present action. Everything else will unfold according to forces beyond your control. This is not limitation, it is clarity, and clarity removes unnecessary weight from the mind. As you move through the day, notice how quickly your attention drifts away from present duty. A small difficulty appears, and the mind immediately constructs a larger narrative. A simple task feels uncomfortable, and the mind seeks distraction. A conversation becomes mentally edited in real time as you imagine how it might be received later. These are forms of abandonment of the present. To correct this, return attention to what is physically and rationally required in the moment. What is the task in front of you? What is the appropriate response according to reason? What action is required here, not elsewhere? This constant return is the practice of disciplined living. You will notice resistance. The mind prefers abstraction because abstraction avoids responsibility. It allows you to feel busy without being precise. It allows you to feel concerned without being effective. It allows you to feel engaged without being accountable. But none of this produces stability. Only present action does. When you bring attention back to duty, emotional noise begins to lose its authority. Anxiety often comes from projecting control into the future. Regret often comes from holding the past in present awareness. but neither past nor future is actionable. When you remove them from your focus, emotional distortion weakens. This does not mean ignoring consequences. It means placing consequences in their correct position. You act according to reason now, and consequences unfold later outside your control. Your responsibility is not to manage all outcomes, but to ensure that your present action is not corrupted by fear of outcomes. Each time you face a task, examine whether your hesitation comes from the task itself or from imagined implications. Most hesitation does not arise from difficulty, but from anticipation of judgment, failure, or uncertainty. These are not present realities, they are projections, and projections cannot guide action accurately. The disciplined mind refuses to let projections override present clarity. It acknowledges them, then returns to duty. It does not negotiate with imagined futures. It does not rehearse past mistakes. It remains anchored in what can be done here and now. At the beginning of each morning, prepare for this discipline by stating clearly that the day will consist of present duties only, not future concerns, not past analysis, only present action guided by reason. This preparation reduces the tendency of the mind to wander into irrelevant territory. Throughout the day, every time you notice your attention scattered, treat it as a signal to return, not with frustration, but with correction. The return itself is the practice. Each return strengthens the capacity to remain present. Each moment of presence reduces dependence on mental distraction. At the end of the day, review how often you remained with your duty versus how often you abandoned it through thought. Do not focus on performance outcomes. Focus on attention discipline. Where did you stay with the task? Where did you drift into speculation? Where did you allow imagined scenarios to replace present action? This reflection is not about judgment of success or failure. It is about recognition of pattern. Once the pattern is seen, it can be interrupted, and what can be interrupted can be corrected. Over time, correction becomes habit, and attention stabilizes. As this practice develops, something important changes in your experience of life. Tasks no longer feel fragmented. You begin completing actions with full presence rather than partial attention. You begin speaking without mental distraction. You begin working without internal division. This creates efficiency, but more importantly, it creates stability. You also notice that stress decreases not because responsibilities disappear, but because unnecessary mental extension of responsibility disappears. You stop carrying the weight of what has not yet happened. You stop revisiting what cannot be changed. You stop dispersing energy into irrelevant timelines. Your mind becomes concentrated on what is real. This concentration is what gives strength to action. A divided mind produces weak execution. A present mind produces precise execution. And precision reduces internal conflict because there is no longer friction between thought and action. Eventually, present duty becomes enough, not in a limiting sense, but in a stabilizing one. You no longer require mental escape into future or past to feel engaged. The present moment contains sufficient structure for disciplined living, and within that structure, your actions become clear and steady. This is how a rational life is built, not by controlling everything, but by fully inhabiting what is directly yours. The present duty is always yours, and when it is fully embraced, the mind no longer needs to wander in order to feel alive. Number 10. Build happiness through wisdom rather than human presence. You keep treating happiness as something that arrives when the right people are near you, as if presence alone could stabilize your inner life. But you already know this is not true, even if you do not always admit it. You have felt loneliness in crowded rooms and restlessness in moments of company. This is because happiness built on presence is always dependent on conditions that are not yours to govern. You must examine the pattern in your thinking. When you feel unsettled, your mind often reaches outward first. It assumes that discomfort is solved by another person entering your experience. It assumes that silence is a problem that conversation must fix. It assumes that absence is a deficiency that company must fill. But none of these assumptions have been examined with reason. They are habits, not truths. The human mind easily confuses stimulation with stability. Presence of others creates movement in attention, and movement can feel like relief. But relief is not the same as wisdom. It is only interruption of awareness. When that interruption fades, the underlying state returns. And if that underlying state is not governed by reason, the dependence on external presence remains unchanged. You are not disturbed because you are alone or because others are absent. You are disturbed because your judgment about absence has not been trained. You interpret solitude as lack instead of seeing it as neutral condition. And that interpretation produces emotional reaction that feels like suffering, but is actually misjudgment. Wisdom does not depend on who is near you. It depends on how you think when no one is correcting your thinking for you. It is the discipline of understanding what is within your control and what is not, and refusing to confuse the two. Human presence is not within your control in the way your judgments are. Therefore, if your happiness depends on it, your happiness is not stable. You must begin to recognize how often your emotional state shifts based on external interaction. A conversation lifts your mood, then absence lowers it. Attention stabilizes you, then silence unsettles you. Agreement soothes you, then disagreement disturbs you. This constant fluctuation reveals that your center is placed outside your control. The disciplined mind corrects this by relocating its center inward. Not inward in emotional isolation, but inward in rational governance. It builds stability through judgment that does not require reinforcement from external presence. It learns to evaluate life through reason rather than reaction to social environment. Each morning, before you engage with others, you must remind yourself that your mind will attempt to outsource stability. It will seek comfort in presence, validation in attention, and reassurance in interaction, but none of these are foundations. They are secondary experiences. The foundation is your capacity to judge clearly in their absence. As the day unfolds, observe how quickly your attention turns toward others when discomfort appears. A difficult thought arises, and you want conversation. A moment of doubt appears, and you want reassurance. A sense of emptiness appears, and you want distraction through interaction. These impulses are understandable, but they are not reliable guides. You must interrupt this automatic movement outward. Before seeking presence, return to judgment. Ask whether what you are feeling is based on reality or interpretation. Ask whether the discomfort arises from external lack or internal expectation. Most often, it arises from expectation that has not been examined. Happiness built on wisdom does not depend on constant engagement. It depends on clarity of thought that remains steady whether others are present or not. This does not reduce the value of relationships. It corrects the dependence placed upon them. Relationships remain part of life, but they no longer carry responsibility for inner stability. You must also examine how often you assign emotional responsibility to others without realizing it. You expect their presence to regulate your mood. You expect their responses to confirm your worth. You expect their attention to maintain your sense of balance. This is not relationship. It is dependence disguised as connection. Wisdom removes this burden from others and from yourself. It recognizes that no external person can govern your judgment for you. They can influence your thoughts, but they cannot determine whether those thoughts are accepted or corrected. That responsibility remains entirely within your control. When you begin to rely on wisdom instead of presence, solitude becomes neutral. It no longer feels like absence of something necessary. It becomes a space where your judgment is uninterrupted by external influence. In that space, you can observe your thinking more clearly without distraction. You will notice resistance when you first attempt this shift. The mind will attempt to convince you that presence is essential for emotional stability. It will present discomfort as evidence that something is missing, but discomfort is not evidence of deficiency. It is evidence of transition from dependence to independence. You must learn to sit with this discomfort without immediately resolving it through external engagement. When you resist the impulse to escape into interaction, you give space for judgment to become clearer, and clarity, once established, reduces the perceived need for constant presence. At the end of each day, examine where your happiness depended on others rather than on your own judgment. Identify moments where your emotional state rose or fell based on interaction. Then ask whether those shifts were necessary or simply habitual responses to external stimulation. This reflection is not about rejecting others. It is about understanding the structure of your dependence. You are not asked to eliminate connection, but to eliminate reliance. There is a difference between engaging with people and requiring them to stabilize your inner world. As this discipline strengthens, you will begin to notice a shift in how you experience relationships. You engage more clearly because you are no longer using others as emotional anchors. You listen more attentively because you are not seeking validation in return. You speak more honestly because you are not filtering yourself for approval or comfort. At the same time, your experience of solitude changes. It is no longer uncomfortable by default. It becomes a natural condition in which your reasoning remains active without external input. In this state, you begin to recognize that stability was never dependent on presence, but on disciplined thought. Wisdom gradually replaces dependence as the source of happiness, not because others become irrelevant, but because they are no longer mistaken for the foundation of peace. Happiness becomes something generated through clarity of judgment, rather than something received through interaction. You still value connection, but you no longer depend on it to regulate your inner state. You still engage with people, but you do not lose yourself in their presence. You still appreciate conversation, but you do not require it to feel complete. This is the final correction. To build a mind that remains steady regardless of presence or absence, because its stability is anchored in reason alone. And a mind anchored in reason does not wait for others to arrive in order to be at peace.